All right, so that's a quick illustration of what we might do if we're going to just plan a graduation party. We just go in and, like I just did in the last example, we just type in sometimes the literal numbers. So in this case, in the hall rental, remember that I just typed in the number 10 and the number 35. We had $10 per person, and we were expecting to invite 35 people. Now this is great. This kind of approach is great for doing some quick calculations, and nothing wrong with it. But I might want to start asking some questions, and I do this a lot of times. I'll start pretty simply, and then I'll say, this is great, but what if I wanted to invite, instead of 35 guests, what if I wanted to invite 50 guests? Or what if I wanted to decrease my cost, for example, down here, and try to get it under $1,000 by inviting fewer guests? So, as is often the case, I'll add a little more complexity and a little more functionality to a spreadsheet. I'm going to hit escape and get out of that. What I want to do here is I'm going to make several scenarios. In this column, the assumption is I have 35 guests coming. Well, in this column, I'm going to make the assumption that I have 50 guests coming. And in this column, column D, I'm going to go and make it a small environment of, let's just say, 15 guests. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just type here in B3. I'm going to make some column headings. I'm going to say 35 guests, and I'm just going to type the number 35, not the words 35 guests. And I'll illustrate that in a little bit, but I'm just going to type a real number here. It's just a number, and then I'm going to type, what did I say, 50 guests? And then here I'm going to type in 15 guests. So those are the number of guests that I'm going to be inviting. And so I'm going to then come back in and start adjusting numbers based on this. Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to come down here and adjust these a little bit, because I'm going to copy these over, and it'll be much easier to do if I use cell references rather than the literal numbers. Let me show you here. I'm in cell B5. I'm going to double click it. Instead of the number 35, I can use the cell reference B3 because I have the number 35 in B3, so I can just use a B3 and refer to the cell that contains the 35 rather than typing literally the 35 in. If I press enter, you'll see the value that it displays didn't change. It's still 350, but if I double click on that cell, you'll see that now it refers to cell B3 rather than actually typing the number 35 in that formula. So I'm going to press enter there, move down to this one, and do the same thing on this one. Instead of typing the number 35 literally in here, I'm going to have it refer to cell B3. The same thing down here for the dinner. The dinner was going to be $6 per person, but if I invite 35 people, instead of typing the 35 here, I'm going to refer to cell B3 here. Press enter. And so now I've got all of these entered in here, but these three items refer to this B3 rather than the actual number 35. So the cool thing about that is if I wanted to, I could just change this to 25. Watch what happens if I change this to 25. When I press enter right here, it should change these formulas. It won't change the formula, but it will change the value displayed, because these three cells in particular are dependent upon what is in B3. They reference B3. So if I press enter, watch the numbers change. Here we go. You see how our cost went down? So I could do that. I'm going to change this back to 35. And I'm going to I want to be able to see the different scenarios here. So I'm going to copy these values over. Now, one great thing about Excel is I can copy values and I can copy formulas. If I just copy this value, for example, if I drag it over with my fill handle, it will copy that number, that value, because I just typed $400 for the band or the DJ. And so it became 400 in each of these cells. The cool thing is, though, if I copy a formula that way by dragging the fill handle, watch what will happen. It copied the formula that was here to here, but it changed the formula. Here, the formula is 10 times B3. I'm going to hit escape. And here, the formula is now 10 times, not B3, but C3. It changed the formula that was here. It copied it over to this column C, but it changed the formula based upon the column that it was being copied to. The same thing here. Instead of it being 10 times B3, it's now 10 times D3. So all of the references that are in the cells changed based upon the column or the cell they're being moved to. So in this case, they moved from B, column B, all the way to D. So that was 2 columns over. So every reference in the cell changes by 2 columns. That's really handy because we can copy this information over really easily. Let me erase these 2 cells again and show you. If I was doing this in reality, I would come down here and I would highlight all of these, and then I can copy them all at once. Watch. Boom. Yeah, pretty cool, because look what happened to chair rental. It was 3 times B3, and now it's 3 times C3 here, but it's 3 times D3 here. It changed that formula. Same thing with dinner. 6 times B3, here it is 6 times C3, here it is 6 times D3. Even the sum function changed. It was the sum of B4 through B8, but when I copied it to here, it became the sum of C4 through C8 and the sum of D4 through D8. So what happens here is now I've got a pretty cool looking spreadsheet that's pretty useful to me right now because I'm using cell references and I'm referring to these cells up here. Notice that I can tell that the cost of this, if I have 35 guests, would be $1,000 here, $1,065. But if I have 50 guests, those costs are going to go up to $1,350. But if I only invite 15 guests, my cost will go down to $685.